This is a topic, the role of sorcery and drugs in opening the last day spirit portal, and I'm getting more and more convinced all the time that this is an area that all people need to be aware of, particularly the Christian community, because we've been very lax in understanding what goes on in this concept of sorcery and the role of drugs and the spiritual implications itself. The whole purpose of this talk, and just to give you a little heads up here, is to educate, first of all, on some history of sorcery and drugs in spirit contact, in use in spirit contact, both from secular and biblical records. Sorcery, if you look in a simple definition, for example, Wikipedia, it's called the manipulation of magic. But I'm very interested in what the ancient world says, and particularly the Bible. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word, it's kashef, I believe is the pronunciation, and it relates to sorcery or witchcraft. In the New Testament, there are actually two words that are used. One is mageo, and that means to be a magician or to practice magical arts. But the one I'm really interested in the most is the term pharmakeia. And pharmakeia is the use or the administering of drugs involved in sorcery, magical arts, and often in connection with idolatry and fostered by it. So drugs are a key connection, and obviously you see the word pharmakeia and its connection to pharmacy and what we know is administering of drugs. In Revelation 18 is a very, very important passage that many people gloss over. In that passage, if you read it, you will find very clearly that the kings of the earth and the great merchants of the earth conspire together, and it says they do sorcery, and the word used there is pharmakeia, which is the use of drugs to control the activities of the world, and it says through this they deceive the nations of the earth, which is a very, very powerful passage and describes a lot about the deception of our world systems and institutions over the populace, over their control of food and drugs and things like this. Well, that's right out of the pages of the Bible, I believe, and I think this passage makes it clear that there is a consortium of government officials as well as people that are in the business, the commercial business, and they find it to their mutual advantage of control to make use of sorcery, which involves the use of drugs and also through dark spiritual powers. And the net effect is they're able to deceive large portions of the world public in their process of this. And these chemicals would probably be best described by the term entheogens, which are drugs which do something to your psychosis, your spirit, to enable you to overcome any barriers, to make direct contact with spirits in the spirit world. And some of the natural substances include something like, I believe it's pronounced psilocybin. It's basically known as magic mushrooms. It's the ingredient in the hallucinogenic mushrooms. We have another chemical called scopolamine, which is also enclosed in chemicals like or plants, natural growing plants like belladonna, henbane, witch's herb, and even something called angel's trumpets, which is very ironic. DMT and its use in a blended form in ayahuasca tea made by the shamans in the Amazon area. And then we have mescaline, which comes from peyote and similar sources like this in Central America. Now, there are man-made chemicals. We have not been satisfied with the natural entheogens. Man has decided to make his own more concentrated versions, and some of these are things like LSD, chemical DMX, which I'll mention more just in a moment, and even commonplace alcohol in certain cases does a very effective role as an entheogen. Now, just to comment on two of these, dextromethorphan, or DMX, believe it or not, it's just used as the key ingredient in common cough suppressants. If you go to the drugstore and look for your cough suppressants, they're going to have a DM symbol typically on them. Unfortunately, according to news reports that are out, it is widely misused as a psychotropic drug by at least 3.1 million Americans. And that's just young Americans that are using this very common over-the-counter drug, taking it in portions that will actually create some kind of spiritual contact. And the reports I have said that they've documented entity contacts, out-of-body experiences, and other paranormal events by use of this simple chemical that we have in our own drug cabinets. There are actions, I believe, now behind the scenes right now that it is premeditated and being planned to have the use of drugs to chemically assist humans in establishing contact and opening portals to the spirit world, to actually overcome whatever limitations we have, any barriers to overcome them. And I would say that if you do some studying in this, you will find, and you're probably already aware, most of you, that a very large portion of our population is already on mood-enhancing or reality-altering drugs. Many of these are, in fact, tryptamine-based products that affect our neurotransmitters, and in many ways are very, very close cousins, very similar in their look to serotonin, to DMT, and similar chemicals itself. And their chemistry is just very, very close to hallucinogens and their effect on neurotransmitters. The long-term effects of these chemicals, since there really so many of them are new in this generation, are not understood, but they have documentation where some of these drugs have gone and had the opposite effect at a later date, unexpectedly, of psychotic events that result in suicides, that result in death events of people. The impact is already happening in society with the number of people who are succumbing to the spiritual impacts of drug consumption and other kind of occult activity, and as well as the increase in psychotic violence that's occurring. Control the substances you and your family ingest, and that requires, and that's all materials, drugs, food, anything you take. Now, not only the physical intake, but also the intellectual and spiritual intake as well. And that requires education, a substantial commitment on your behalf for education, tempered by reasonableness and balance. One can become paranoid in the subject, so you've got to be reasonable, but be smart, be informed in your decisions, and invest the time to be aware of what you ingest.